Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, before we get started, can I get everyone to make sure your doors are shut and your other devices are turned off? I'm going to cover quite a bit of information in a short period of time, so I do need your full attention. Also, everyone on this call will receive a copy of this training and the material at the end of the broadcast. My name is Chris Duffield, and I'm an account executive for New Line Mortgage. For about the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about how to reduce the number of conditions on your loans. We'll review the underwriting process and what conditions are. We'll then discuss the importance of submitting complete files and the repercussions of submitting incomplete files or loans that end up having a lot of conditions. We'll then review some tips that will help you submit a complete file, limiting your number of conditions. Also, before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and ask for your business. As an AE, I'm paid commission, so the best compliment you can give me is to send me a loan. If you find this training useful and learn something new, please send me a loan on any product. New Line offers some great FHA, VA, conventional, and USDA pricing right now. I also have many other trainings available on all the different products, or if there's something unique that you need, just please don't hesitate to contact me. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're talking about limiting the number of conditions. Part of that is understanding the underwriting process, and I'm assuming that most of you have had some kind of exposure to the underwriting process, and you already understand that a loan must be submitted to a lender or an underwriter for approval. Typically, when a lender approves a loan, it comes with conditions. So let's take a moment and talk about the types of conditions. Conditions are documentation requirements that must be satisfied before the loan can close. Typically, there's three types of conditions. You have underwriter to clear conditions. These are conditions that affect the outcome of the loan. They typically have to do with income, credit, liabilities, or assets. An underwriter must sign these off. And then you have prior to closing conditions. These conditions can be signed off by an assistant or a broker coordinator and are typically QC conditions that are completed right before closing. They typically have to do with verbally verifying employment or reviewing the homeowner's insurance, perhaps processing your document request form. In other words, they don't have really anything to do with the rendering a decision of approved or denied on a loan. And then you have prior to funding conditions. These are conditions that are satisfied at closing, and typically the closer can sign them off when reviewing the package for funding. Give me 1 second. I'm going to close my Outlook here. Okay. Sorry about that little interruption. All conditions should be worked on immediately. Ultimately, they're your responsibility, even if you're not responsible for completing them. That is just a mindset I would take on if I were you, as I would make every condition yours. Whether it's something, a lender, or New Line, or Jill, whoever is doing the condition, you should be in charge of that and have that mindset and make sure it's getting done and being worked on. Make sure you're in communication with your lender and each of you understands who's working on what condition. Don't assume all lenders work the same. Make sure you understand each condition and what the lender expects from you and what you can expect from the lender. What happens if you don't submit a complete file? So let's talk a minute before we get into tips, kind of what happens, what the repercussions are if incomplete files are submitted, especially if they're submitted on a regular basis. I'm definitely not here to pick on anybody. We do receive incomplete files here and there, and sometimes it's just a function of your learning curve. We get that there really isn't a lot of formalized training. You definitely cannot go get a degree, in mortgage finance and loan processing. It mostly is trial by fire and learn as you go and train as you go. We get that, so this isn't about picking on anybody. This is just about kind of pointing out what happens in the background, on these incomplete files. And then, of course, I do want to drive home a point about continually submitting incomplete files, so having that be more the norm, because that's really what we're addressing here today is talking about systems overall to improve overall systems. Okay, so when an underwriter is reviewing a file, they are required to have a piece of supporting documentation for every bit of data in the file. If the data is not documented, it's considered invalid, and sometimes we call that a rumor. The documentation must stand on its own as it travels with the file, and it's what the secondary market uses to determine if they'll buy the loan or not. They don't call us or you, they don't call the borrower or the borrower's employer, they don't do any research on the internet, they simply refer to the documentation in the file. And typically, the file is scrubbed by an entry-level person using a checklist. So a lot of times you have somebody with little or no mortgage experience running through a file using a checklist, looking for certain documents and checking a box. And if they're not there, that file really is returned for as non-purchasable. So every piece of data, every scenario, every fact, every figure, all has to be documented. When they do return loans as non-purchasable, obviously we can't buy the loan, or they can't buy the loan. We can't sell the loan. And sometimes we can dispute these findings, but sometimes we can't. So, how we avoid this painstaking process of having to deal with non-purchasable loans is by simply submitting complete files to our investors. We don't have any leeway on that. We've gone as far as flying some of our staff, some of our managers to our investors and sitting down and talking to them about some of the repurchase loans. But still, it's just a big painstaking process. So it really all starts, from the beginning and getting that complete loan in, so that we're not dealing with repurchase loans. So a file is reviewed basically under three categories. You've got the credit history, which is your FICO, your credit report, your liabilities. You've got the capacity to repay the mortgage, which is the income, the employment, the assets, and the ratios. And then you've got the collateral, which is the appraisal and title piece. And these are actually called the 3 C's of underwriting. And, looks pretty simple, but actually it's a huge endeavor for our underwriters. They have to know all of the different program guidelines. So all the different LTV and FICO requirements, the number of units, the occupancy types, and this is for purchase, refinance, cash out, for Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA, USDA, and and whatever other agency is out there, as well as all the documentation requirements for income, employment, assets, liabilities, identity of interest, max allowable closing costs, and just a myriad of other requirements and guidelines. Again, all for those different agency products. And gosh, underwriting guidelines vary for LTV, and for FICO. I mean, it's an endless sea of guidelines of guidelines. And then in addition, they have to know the different investor and warehouse line provider overlays. So you've got all these different agency requirements. Then you've got investor overlays, you've got warehouse line provider overlays, and we work with a dozen investors and we have 6 warehouse lines. So imagine all the information that has to be considered when we're underwriting a file. It takes a minimum of 1 hour to underwrite a loan. It's not an easy process. It takes a minimum of 1 hour to underwrite a loan with multiple conditions or hard loans. Back in the day when I underwrote, I do come from an underwriting background. I underwrote for almost 12 years, and when I underwrote, gosh, we only were underwriting to FHA, VA, Fannie, and Freddie standards. That's it. Lenders didn't have overlays. We hadn't come out with stated income or anything. This was a long time ago when I underwrote. And it was all manual. I didn't have a computer at that time. Everything was handwritten. But gosh, I only had 4 agency guidelines to remember, and I had 4 books sitting there next to me. And I feel lucky because underwriters today, it's completely different. There are a lot more considerations. And back in the day, I could underwrite 10 loans a day. In fact, I remember my boss, that was my minimum requirement for daily production is 10 a day. Our underwriters average 2 to 3 loans a day now. So I just can't say enough how hard it is. And the deal with our industry, and you guys have experienced this too, is they have yet to come up with a system that an underwriter can use to help them underwrite the file. I mean, we've got DU and LP, but that's really just there to help us with high LTVs and to give us a few documentation requirements, or not high LTVs, high DTIs, and to give us, help on a few things like condo approvals, MI requirements. There's a few things in those DU and LP approvals that help us out, but for the most part, with all the different guidelines, documentation requirements, overlays, it does minimal work for all of us. It's not something the underwriter relies on heavily. Like I said, they just look at it mainly for the DTI. So we don't have an advanced system on your side of the fence or ours. The thought process for our underwriters is largely manual, and the tools they have to use are cumbersome. Our investor guidelines, our warehouse provider guidelines, our overlays, they're not stored in one easy access system. They're all over the place. So it's daunting at best to wrap your head around, underwriting a loan and the underwriting process. And these guys have to, sit down and do this every day on multiple loans. And, it's a tough job. And, that's why they're well respected, they're well paid. It takes a certain personality, definitely, to sit down and do that job every day. And, they need your help. And you can help the process along by submitting well-processed and documented files. And, you should know this information. It's pretty much generally considered in the industry that a licensed loan officer and a licensed processor should know RESPA, HMDA, and ACOA, as well as the program that's being sold to the borrower. In fact, most of the broker agreements between lenders and broker owners state that it's the responsibility of the broker to know this information as well and deliver files meeting these statutes and guidelines. So it's all of our responsibility to know all of it. There shouldn't be any passing of the buck in one direction or the other. It is all of our responsibility to know all of these, especially as broker owners and loan officers are out there maintaining their license and attending, trainings to keep their license that covers a lot of the HMDA, RESPA, and ACOA issues. We really should understand them at this point. And, again, I'll just say I'm not picking on anybody. There is no formal training for a lot of this. I mean, there's training definitely, but nothing formalized. It's scattered all over the place. And I'm going to give you some tips on where you can go for training here in just a minute. And it's also generally considered in the industry that the loan officers and processors, it's their responsibility to gather and review the appropriate documentation and not wait for an underwriter to ask for it. So you guys should be gathering it, reviewing it, asking your own questions, answering them, and trying to submit as complete a file as possible based, on the underwriting guidelines as you understand them. Again, we'll go over some tips to help you guys out in that area, but before we do that, there's just a couple things I want to bring to your attention if you don't. I mean, if you kind of just decide, not to take on submitting complete files and kind of keep going the way you're going, or even on one file, if you're sick or just not in the mood or just don't know what to do and you decide to just throw a file in and see how it turns out, let's talk about some things that can happen. I've outlined 4 specific issues here. So the first one is obviously you're going to get a lot of conditions, which is what we're talking about today. Rarely, if a loan has a lot of conditions, does the rest of the file go smoothly. A lot of conditions means the underwriter has a lot of questions, and generally only about 50 to 75% of the underwriter's questions are answered upon reviewing the first set of conditions. This leaves a lot of unanswered questions, and often more condition requirements are a result of questions being answered a few conditions at a time. We call it breeding conditions. Conditions breed conditions. And I've seen loans go from pre-approved to suspended and declined because of this. So imagine, you submit a file and it's pretty incomplete and you've got 25 conditions. So you go out and you're like, great, I know how I'm going to put this loan together. You go out, you gather what you think are the 25 conditions and you submit them. Statistically, this is based on personal experience over many years, you're probably still going to end up with 10 to 15 conditions because the conditions, there's so many, it's just impossible to be that detail-oriented that you could, submit all your conditions in and get a flawless underwriting back at that point. But because the file was so incomplete in the first place, now you've given more information, and now the underwriter has more questions, and so conditions get added. This is just super common. I see this, I listed it number 1 because this is exactly what we're talking about today, is, submitting loans with a lot of conditions. Those conditions just seem to never go away, and it takes a long time to get it down to no conditions. The other thing that happens is you don't get a complete underwriting decision. I've seen underwriters miss important guidelines and income documentation requirements because there is so much going on with the file. And I've seen loans go from approved to suspended and declined because of this. Underwriters are human. They are just like you and I. They make mistakes, and they make mistakes on a regular basis. Many times they're able to fix them, sometimes they're not. I'll give you an example of a loan that I had come in a while back. The loan had about 25 conditions on it, and it started out on one product. And as we underwrote the file, it turns out they didn't qualify for that product, so we switched it to another product and continued with the underwriting of that file. And we were actually focused on a different area in the file. It was a different part of the income that we were focused on, and changing programs and focusing on one area of the file. Plus there were, like I said, 25 conditions, so there's conditions literally on every subject going on in that file. It took about 60 days to get the file down to a point where the underwriter was signing off basically the last condition to get the file over to closing. And as the underwriter was going through and signing off that condition, she realized, oh my gosh, I never asked for documentation for this other type of income. There was a whole other type of income. I think we had 4 sources of income in there, and one of the we questioned the whole income, but she forgot to document the source of one of the incomes, and that was huge. So, we had to go back to everybody and continue to work on the file. It took nearly 30 days and a gift letter for a down payment because we had to switch programs. It was just a mess. And yeah, my underwriter missed it. I can't deny it. There's no way I can hide that. But, there was a lot going on with the file, and it was a common guideline. Like, everyone should know the guideline. For example, if we need to document child support income for the last 12 months, everybody kind of should know that guideline. If an underwriter doesn't ask for it, you want to do your best to kind of QC the underwriter's response and make sure that they are covering all their bases as well. And you can do that after the underwriter looks at the file, or you can do it before, by creating a good process. Anyway, my point is that they miss things like we all do. And Unfortunately, when an underwriter misses things, it's a bigger deal because it's towards the end of the process when we're expecting to close. The third thing that can happen is you don't get good service. Knowing issues 1 and 2 exist, lenders are far less happy and willing to provide fast service on files that have a lot of conditions. They're not happy because they know that every time an underwriter reviews a file, it's costing them money, and underwriters are expensive. That's why they put incomplete files back in line and has some of the service standards they do. Also, if an underwriter moves too fast, then we risk an unsaleable loan, which costs even more money. They simply need time to do their job and get reacquainted with the file so they don't make mistakes. And I say this because it's ironic. Files with a lot of conditions turn out to be rush files because they've taken so long to get through underwriting. You know, and at Newline, one of the ways that we manage our workflow and we manage incomplete files is if we have a file with a lot of conditions or hard conditions, then we put that file back in the underwriting queue. We don't put that file in the condition queue. It goes back into the underwriting queue. And you're subject to current turn times in underwriting. So that's kind of how we manage it. We don't want it to get in the way of conditions on loans that are almost ready to close. We put it back in there with the underwrites. And you have lenders, you know, do different things. So, and then the last one, number 4, is you simply don't earn a good reputation with your lenders. Over time, if incomplete files become the norm, then lenders and their staff are far less likely to give you good service, do favors for you, or try to help you or train you. Complete files are a key to a fruitful and long-term relationship with your lender. You can deliver clean files, and moreover, if you can deliver a lot of complete files, then your lender will most likely be willing to work out better service standards for you and maybe even special service standards, and they may be willing to work out pricing specials. You guys, I know this from experience. I've been doing this 35 years. I've always worked for major lenders. In the last 15 years, I've been in wholesale. And on the back end, on the underwriting piece, underwriting support piece, on the closing and funding piece, you know, those back-end people that you don't have a lot of communication with, whether you're a loan officer or a broker, you know, you've got a reputation with these people in the background. You know, and these are real people with lives that need to go home at night and, you know, be happy. And, you know, nothing's really automated in the background. You have a lot of people working on your files. And whether you're an individual loan officer or you're a broker, you develop reputations with these people. And the first thing they associate when they hear your name is a good or a bad kind of thought. So, you know, if they hear John Doe or XYZ Mortgage and that, you know, person or entity has a great reputation, they're happy to hear from him. You know, if they don't have a great reputation, it's a little different story. And this translates over to service, and it's kind of like the little things. And a couple of examples of what I mean, you know, me coming from an underwriting background, I'll just be honest, you know, at the end of the day, like I said, I was supposed to underwrite 10 files a day. Well, maybe I got 8 done, and I need to take 2 files home that day. I walked to that underwriting queue, and I pulled 2 files from loan officers or brokers or processors that I know and had a reputation for doing a good job. Because I'm going home, it's my time away now from my family and my personal life. You know, I'm going to work on files that I like to work on, you know, with people that I like to work with. And, you know, and as an underwriter, I would do favors. You know, if somebody called me up who has a good reputation for delivering complete files, rarely asks for a favor and says, hey, Chris, I really need your help on this, I was all over it without any hesitation whatsoever. You know, but it's a completely different story if you don't have that reputation. You know, your files do sometimes get skipped over. Somebody will take a lunch before they work on your file or work on your conditions. It's kind of the little things, you know. And then if, you know, if you've got a really big reputation, you know, you get less price breaks, you know, you get less rushes, you know, people just aren't as willing and they don't really want to spend a lot of time with you. It's just about, getting your question answered and hurry moving on, so they don't have to deal with that situation anymore. So over time, it's really, really important. And, for some of the bigger shops out there, it's really important for you guys, especially if you have branches all over the place, that you're creating a good experience, not only for, your realtors and your borrowers, but for your lenders as well, because, you've got a pretty big reputation out there to protect, and a lot of different people out there that can affect that same reputation. So, that's it. That's kind of the things that can happen, if we're dealing with a lot of incomplete files. Like I said, I'm not picking on anybody. We definitely deal with a lot of well-trained, well-intentioned brokers as well. But, we are in a time and an environment where loans are just hard. Loans are so hard right now. And every loan is different. And every loan is special, and scenarios are different. After 35 years, you would think that, I've seen it all, and I haven't. I'm still stumped 2 or 3 times a week on scenarios. So there's a lot of learning as we go, but if everyone can, do the best job possible, submit a complete file, or at least have the intention. We can actually tell the intention of submitting a complete file, even if it ends up being incomplete, as opposed to somebody who, literally just gives us a couple of pay stubs, one W-2, 1 month's bank statement, and that's it. And then they throw the file in and want to see what we're going to condition for. There's a noticeable difference. And so, with that, the loan process can turn out to be cumbersome for all involved, and it just doesn't give you or us or the realtor, your borrower, a good experience. And sometimes we can make up lost time, and sometimes we can't. It just kind of depends what's on our plate for that day and kind of the mood for everyone. So with all of that said, let's talk about some things that you guys can do, to help get yourself systematized and getting files submitted complete, and ultimately get that repeat business. That is what we're all working for. We get that you guys need the referral and repeat business from your customers, because that's where our business comes from. We need that from you, and we know you need it from your customers. And there's definitely a lot of things that can be done on your end, and we can help you as well. The best way to become systematized and in that business is to know your product, know the underwriting guidelines, know the documentation requirements, and create a system to submit a complete to submit a complete file. Your goal should be to have the least amount of conditions possible. And you guys, I can't stress enough how personally I am here to help you. This is one of my favorite parts of my job. Is I love to train. I love to come in and look at systems. I've owned a brokerage before. I've been doing this a long time. I ran a national contract processing company. I know how to put together systems. I have a very great bird's eye view of what you guys need and what a lender needs. And, I can mesh those needs into one system that's kind of a win-win for all. So that's enough about me. This training isn't necessarily about Chris or Newline. This is about you and what you guys can do, and how you can work with other lenders as well. So all lenders have product guidelines, and they should all have representatives that can help you research your loan scenarios. If they don't have representatives, they don't have training, you may want to consider working with a different lender. Use the tools and services a lender provides to help you understand what their documentation requirements are, what their underwriting guidelines are. Hopefully they have a comprehensive website, or the representative has created training outside of the website. If they don't have training and you really want to use them, then you need to ask for training. You need to get in there and let them know that you're interested in using them. And, I would try and do this before I sent loans over. In fact, I would try and pick a few lenders to work with, get to know their systems inside and out, and ask them for training up front. And like I said, if they don't provide the training, you may want to consider working with a different lender. I've been in your shoes, and I've sent loans to a lender. Literally, they sent me a submission form and a website address, and that's all I got. And And I went in there, and it was pretty tough to maneuver around, and there was zero trainings on their systems, zero trainings on anything. And, so I requested the training. I requested the rep come out and sit down with me and go through and do the training with me. I think that's perfectly acceptable. And I know you guys deal with a lot of lenders, and you may not want to be trained with all of them. That's why I say pick a few that are your major lenders. And yeah, you may have to make the sacrifice and spend a little bit more time up front than you'd like to get to know their systems. I know a lot of times it's kind of considered that lenders are all the same, or basically all the same, or systems basically are all the same. That's true to a point, but it's that one little ticky-tacky thing that can kill you. Like if you assume that all lenders' lock policies are the same, and you find out one lender has this one little ticky-tacky thing in their lock policy that you didn't know about, and it's completely different from the other lenders. And had you known that, you may or may not have sent that deal to them, based on the scenario. It's that one little teeny thing that can kill you. And all you need to do is kill one loan to kill one relationship, to kill future referral business. You mess up on one loan with your best realtor who has sent you, half your loans, well, there goes 50% of your income. So it's really important, in my opinion, that no matter what lender you're working with, their lock policy, their submission policy, their underwriting guidelines, their forms, fill out their forms with them. Just really research what you need to know about the lender up front before you submit that loan to them. Make sure you know who you're submitting your loan to. Outside of lender training, there's other mortgage training available. It's not super organized. It's all over the place, but there are several resources you can go to. The internet is one. I use Google, but there's a lot of different search engines out there. And, I've Googled mortgage training. I've Googled loan officer training, loan officer license training, and you will get a list of trainings pages long. And a lot of the trainings are on the internet. A few of our local training providers, like mortgage educators, they'll pop up as a training resource. And yeah, I'd bite the bullet, pay for some training here and there. Go find a subject that interests you, that you're working on mostly, and get yourself trained. Another resource is YouTube, and I've recently discovered that because my videos are recorded on YouTube. So I'm recording this training right now, and it will be posted on YouTube after we're done here. And it'll be available for future viewing, and it'll be on my blog. And so when I was in there training or uploading my videos, I noticed that similar trainings on the menu bar on the right popped up. And I noticed there were a lot of people like me uploading their trainings, for whatever reason, if they wanted to share it with their own group or whatever. But there's a lot of public training on YouTube that covers a lot of different subjects. And what I like is the point of view and kind of the frankness, or not the frankness, but the layman's terms that the training is in. We all sit in a lot of these mortgage industry trainings, and it's so over the top as far as legalese is concerned, and, laws and, things we need to know. But, really for mortgage lending, there's a kind of a place we need to go where we can learn on the fly. You need somebody standing over your shoulder, talking you through how to take a loan application or calculating income, and you need to do it on the fly because you've got a loan right now. YouTube has a lot of that kind of trainings, and I have a lot of that kind of training. It's on my blog. Anyway, I would dedicate yourself to 1 hour of training a day on a new product service, on a lender guideline, on an underwriting guideline. Pick something specific and just sit down for an hour and train on it or read on it. If you do that, every day for a year, that's, 365 hours of training. That's an expert in your industry. That's as much as school. And they actually say that in a lot of the books that I read in regards to personal development and sales and marketing. Reading 1 hour per day turns you into an expert in your industry. And the other thing you can do is develop a loan origination and processing system and follow it every time. Create a McDonald's-like experience for your customers. Create a timeline for every loan and review this with your realtor and your borrower. Let your customers know you need time to do your job as well as you need time to do your job. So, and you need to go over deadlines with them of when you need to have their last piece of documentation, because you need a couple of days to review it and gather it and package it and put it into or deliver it to the lender. So don't be afraid to sit down and go through a timeline and create it. I've made some tools, a couple tools I'm going to share with you real quick, at the end, and I'll include this when I send it out to you. But that timeline is key. Creating a timeline on every single loan is key because it sets the expectation for the process of the loan. And if you meet that expectation, then your realtors and your borrowers will have a great experience. What you actually earn with them is trust, and trust is what brings your loans back or brings your customers back to you. And yeah, so you set the expectation and you meet it. You get the trust, you get the repeat business. I call it the McDonald-like experience, and this is from some training that I've received in the past. The reason why chains like McDonald's or even some realtor chains out there or some mortgage company chains, the reason why they are so super successful and can open up and be successful in any market is because they've created an experience that you trust. You know that when you go into a McDonald's in Norway or a McDonald's in Japan or a McDonald's in Salt Lake City, Utah, your Big Mac is going to taste the same as it does anywhere. You trust that. And that's an expectation that McDonald's has created. And that's an expectation that McDonald's meets every time, and it's trust. And that's why you do it, and you love it, and you go there, and you'll do it forever because you trust it. We all want to work with people we trust and do business with people we trust. Your realtors and your borrowers are just like that. They want to have the same experience every time with people they trust. So the only way that you're going to build that, well, not the only way, but, a great way to emulate, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, is just, create a system that works and make it McDonald-like so that you're so systematized that the loan is just processed the same way every time. You could consider processing your loan in stages, okay, like a lender, like Newline. We process hundreds of loans a month. We do that with a handful of people. I think I have 6 people in my department processing hundreds of loans a month. Oops. Uh-oh, lost my training. Sorry, guys. So, yeah, we have one person does setup, one person underwrites. We have underwriting support, and then we have a closer. You guys can do the same thing. You can designate, people in your office to work in different stages, like different processors. Now, this doesn't work if you don't work with multiple processors, but in an environment where you work with multiple people, you can have somebody set up, you can have somebody process, and you can have maybe somebody underwrite the loan. And you guys can change jobs, by the way. You can completely switch that up. So one week somebody processes, one week somebody underwrites, one week somebody sets up, and then the next week you all switch, or do it every 2 weeks, or do it every month. That way you have processors in there that know the entire loan process and can help on any loan at any given time, but during a certain period of time they're only responsible for a certain piece of the file. And then what that does is it gives you checkpoints along the way in the loan process, and you're likely to catch missing documentation and errors, from one stage to the next. So I think that's huge. Use tools to help you submit a complete file, like checklists, conversation logs, status logs, loan timelines. Don't just wing it. You need some tools available to help support you and your systems. I've seen a lot of my brokers' offices, usually some kind of a huge status board where all the loans are listed and the status of each loan. And if you're one of those, I would challenge you maybe to add a couple columns onto that and not just show where the loan is, but show where the loan needs to be in a couple of, in a couple of key areas. Like put a submission deadline date column, like it needs to be to the lender by this date. So, and then before that, you can track where the loan is. And that way when you walk in or your loan officers walk in, they can say, ooh, I've got 3 loans that need to be submitted to New Line, in 3 days. And it kind of visually gives you, the status of your loans and what you should be working on first. But I would manage your pipeline more by the by when dates, not by what the current status dates are. And again, going back to that timeline, I just can't stress how important it is to set that up with your realtor and plan ahead. Leave some room for error. Timelines are great, especially if you can meet the timelines, but they should include 2 to 3 days of cushion for error in case the borrower makes an error, the realtor does, you do, or the lender. Give yourself some cushion so that, that's the only way I know how to combat errors. Errors are going to happen. And if nobody's given a cushion for that, we're still going to blow past purchase contract deadlines and lock expirations. You've got to give a little bit of room because sometimes you just can't make up for errors. Sometimes it's just physically impossible. So those are some things you guys can do. I hope I've given you a lot of good ideas. Once the loan is underwritten and your conditions are signed off, just want to mention a little bit about the closing and funding process. The loan can close once all the conditions are signed off. Closing policy and procedure guidelines vary per lender. One consistency, however, are the prior to closing document conditions. We all typically have them. An underwriter will usually issue all of your conditions at once, including your closing document conditions. Just start to work on everything immediately. Don't wait until the loan is approved and ready to close and then start working on your closing document conditions. Make sure you're working on all your conditions all at once. If you understand the underwriting process, what the underwriter is responsible for, what the lender process is, and all of the statutes, documentation, and underwriting guidelines, you can map out what you're responsible for. And understanding, your responsibilities is the key to creating a foolproof system that produces complete loans with few conditions. It does all start with you guys. So with that, real quick, let's see. I've got a couple of quick tools. Unfortunately, I don't have them already open, so you'll have to bear with me while I go find them. So I've got this documentation checklist. This one's a VA purchase, but I do have a general documentation checklist that I'll be sending out to you guys. And the documentation checklist, I think this is maybe one of the most important tools you could create, if not the most important. But this is a documentation checklist for every single document that could be required in a file. And what I did is I made 2 columns. So somebody could maybe go through and click what is required on a loan. And you can use this, you can make one for each loan or just use a master list and make some notes off to the side, whatever you want to do. I personally would consider doing one of these for every loan and have somebody go through and mark what documentation is required, and then somebody else can go through and mark what's been received, meaning they've reviewed it, they've answered all their own questions, and it's officially received. And this is a huge document, you guys. It's 8 pages, but hey, that's the loan process. The loan process is huge. There's a lot of documents that need to be received and reviewed, and put in the file correctly. What I tried to do was break down the different categories, and kind of following the loan flow process. So I've started out with disclosures and then processing, and then the initial 1003. Those first 3 things, disclosures, processing, documents, and the 1003, I would have the loan officers and processors do some QC work in these 3 areas right off the bat as part of the loan setup. I would get in there and QC these 3 things and make sure you're crystal clear and you have everything you need on there. And then as the loan moves through whatever process you've created, you can QC for credit. And you can see that I really have put pretty much every document on here. Employment, income. I mean, this will help you ask for documentation that you don't even know you need. That's how complete this is. And if it's incomplete, that means you're only going to miss one or two things, which means you're only going to have one or two conditions, and that's our goal. Liabilities, assets, I broke it out for that. Collateral, I broke down the document, the acquisition piece where we're documenting the acquisition of the property, the purchase contract, the appraisal, inspections, title report, all the documents required with the title report, and then, of course, your lender documents. That's it. I highly recommend you go to my training, reviewing a purchase contract. I would do that in tandem with this training, you guys. Reviewing the purchase contract will go through and give you key areas that you need to look at in the contract. Oops, excuse me. And it also comes with a questionnaire that you can review with your realtors and do an interview with them up front. And it includes a timeline review of the loan process. I actually might break that timeline review out into a separate training. But that's all I have for today, guys. I think I've gone over my time. If you found this training useful, please send me a loan. You've got my contact information here. Make note of my blog. I've got a lot of great training on my blog and would be able to help you out. It's kind of that over-the-shoulder training style that I was talking to you about where, I'm kind of helping you as you are working on your loans. So thanks for your time and have a great day.